An existential crisis. That is the reality laid out in a troubling new United Nations report, which foreshadows mass extinctions if humans don't take major action in the next few years. According to the 1,500-page biodiversity report, 1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened, which could have devastating consequences for the rest of us if we don't take major steps to curb the effects of climate change and other factors like pollution, land overuse, and hunting and fishing. This report and others like it have prompted protests across the globe and here in the U.S., now the only country in the world to reject the Paris Climate Agreement, an issue Democrats are not shying away from on the campaign trail.
When it comes to climate change, our very existence is at stake. But Washington refuses to lift a finger without permission from the fossil fuel companies.
We can save the future generations of our country and this world, but there has been a failure to do that because this administration and the people who are a part of it are in the pockets of big oil.
For the Trump administration's part, Secretary Mike Pompeo defended the U.S.'s role as a world climate leader in a meeting with leaders from Arctic nations last week.
America is the world's leader in caring for the environment. Our energy-related CO2 emissions fell by 14% between 2006 and 2017. The rest of the world rose by more than 20%.
But earlier in the same press conference, Pompeo also said this.
The Arctic is at the forefront of opportunity and abundance. It houses 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, 30% of its undiscovered gas, and an abundance of uranium, rare earth minerals, gold, diamonds, and millions of square miles of untapped resources. Fisheries galore. Steady reductions in sea ice are opening new passageways and new opportunities for trade.
So, as the Trump administration looks for ways to profit from the effects of climate change, is there really hope the U.S. and other countries will take the steps needed to prevent further climate disaster? Joining me are David Cash, Dean and Associate Professor at UMass Boston's School of Policy and Global Studies and a former Massachusetts Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protections, and Anthony Janetos, the Director of the Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future and the Chair of the Department of Earth and Environment at Boston University. Thank you both for being here. Let's start out. Can you tell me if this report is as depressing as it seems to be? Because I was reading through the executive summary, and it was almost stupefyingly pessimistic, or that was my takeaway anyway. Am I misreading anything, or is it as bleak as I'm saying?
I think it's pretty grim. I think it's a catalog of all of the problems that we're doing. You focus mostly on climate change, but there are many other issues in terms of overfishing, how we treat the marine environment, that are grim. It's a wake-up call. But I think also embedded in that report are some of the solutions, and possible solutions, which not only will protect the planet, but uplift the most vulnerable, create a more equitable society in general.
Let's get to the potential, positive or uplifting, silver lining stuff in a second. But let's focus on the negative still. Are you on the same page as he and I are?
I am. I think one of the challenges is it's only the latest in this kind of news. There have been many of us who participated in previous sort of cousins of this assessment, both on biological diversity and then on ecosystem services. When I went through the executive summary, which was what was recently released and has been talked about in all the newspapers, it reads like we didn't do anything for 25 years since the last one of these statements. And so now you have the scientific community saying, you've got to wake up. Because this is not just a matter of a million species. This is also a matter of the sort of ecological and environmental foundation that actually generates wealth, agricultural productivity, food security, and we've put it in danger. It's really clear. My sense is, I'm 46 years old, and I feel like in my lifetime, I could be wrong here, but I feel like I've seen awareness of the need for biodiversity steadily increase. I've seen, various campaigns mounted to protect against overfishing, for example, or the catching of dolphins as people fish for tuna. I feel like I've seen evidence time and again that this is stuff that people are concerned about on some level, and yet, if I read this report or the executive summary correctly, the problem has only gotten worse. Am I right that the awareness has increased, and if so, why have the consequences or why have the effects not reflected that increase in awareness?
Well, it could be simply that the awareness hasn't increased enough. nor has the kind of interconnectedness of the ecosystem's natural world and human dimensions really been understood. I was thinking about this today as I read the Grimm report, and it's complicated, and it shows various intersections. And I used to be a high school and middle school science teacher. We can all remember, your viewers probably remember that simple food web of grass and a bunny and a hawk, right? Of course you remember that. It's obviously much more complicated than that. But what this report is saying, it's not just about food. It's about the many different ways ecosystems protect us. So if you think, for example, about marshes around New Orleans that were denuded and destroyed, when you think about who was impacted by that, it were vulnerable people living in New Orleans who were hit by Hurricane Katrina, because those marshes no longer served as barriers. And so it's not just about food, it's about the many different kinds of ways that the natural systems protect us.
Just to flesh
and
out
and not just protect us, but actually help generate wealth, right? They generate well-being, they sustain soil productivity, they do a lot. They absorb floodwaters coming down the rivers and not just sea level rise and storms coming in. So there's a lot there, and this is one of the points in the report where we are beginning to be able to identify what some of these services are, right? And so the way the scientific community has phrased this is ecosystem services, and some of those we could partially engineer our way out of, but not all of them. And so we're at a point now where we're at this sort of tipping point where the costs of trying to engineer your way out of a solution are just going to become prohibitively large.
I'm glad that you're talking about the concrete downside to allowing things to continue the way they have been, because I think a lot of people, when they specifically think of biodiversity, if you hear, okay, 1 million of the Earth's plant and animal species are potentially on the verge of extinction, many people have the reaction, which is my default, which is, oh, what a shame we had stewardship of this planet and we haven't exactly executed it that well. But I think people tend not to think of risks to us if that process continues on such a broad scale. So can you flesh out, again, focusing on biodiversity, some more of the risks that humans will face if, in fact, mass extinction becomes real?
So one of the challenges, so imagine if one of the victims in this are honeybees and wild pollinators. Then we're in a lot of trouble because, major cash crops, major traded agricultural commodities depend on animal pollination. Right? They depend on bees, both wild bees and honeybees. They depend on moths. They depend on a lot of different insects. And if you start to lose those, then there's this cascading effect through those food webs, right? But now they're food webs that have a consequence for us, right? Because it's no longer in the grocery store.
And here's another example closer to home. We have a decades-long history of not managing our fisheries very well in the northeast of the United States. And that has led to boom and busts, but mostly busts of the cod population. And the real impact, one of the real impacts on the human side, is economic devastation in cities like Gloucester and Salem, not to mention the marine impacts that we're going to see on the ecosystem basis. We're both talking about how this is very important for humans, but we also note that there are these ecosystems by themselves without us that are impacted. But these are two examples, whether it's pollinators or fishery stocks. They're outlined in depth in this report.
The report says that there is still time to get back to your uplifting angle that you were going at earlier. The report says, and I think we have this quote, and it's worth putting on the screen for viewers to see, that it is not too late to turn things around when it comes to our care of the Earth, but that will require transformative change, a fundamental system-wide reorganization across technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. When I hear that is what it's going to take, I mean, it essentially sounds to me like they're saying if we revolutionize what it means to be human and how humans think of their relationship with nature, then we could fix this. But that seems like a long shot. Am I being too pessimistic?
No, I think you are being too pessimistic. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and societies around the world have demonstrated that time and time again, whether it's indigenous cultures that have figured out how to be a fishing community that doesn't deplete their stocks, or the cleanup of Boston Harbor. You would not have gone swimming in Boston Harbor 30 years ago. And we marshaled incentives, investment, regulation to clean up the harbor. It's now an incredible economic engine in Boston, and it's I'm not going to say pristine ecosystem, but I mean, there are whales that have been in it. So those are the kind of examples that we can look to that have transformed the system.
There were bald eagles pulling fish out of the Charles last week. I saw one from my office window.
Can you throw out some more examples of what transformative change might look like close to home?
So we're seeing some of this kind of transformative change in the energy system now. I mean, you play on the tapes that you played on the lead-in, there was a lot of discussion about climate change. Well, you know, the influx of renewable energy, of solar energy and wind energy into the energy system is, I think, the kind of transformative change that this report is talking about. It's not big enough yet, but you know, just for example, we've done a climate plan for BU, for Boston University, and as part of that, we will be getting essentially all of our electricity from wind projects, generating no emissions whatsoever. So those opportunities are out there.
And if I could build on Tony's point on climate and energy, one of the key ways of transforming is aligning incentives that are not just good for the economy, but are good for the environment. We don't generally think about that, but when we do, it opens up a huge area.
Yeah.
So for example, solar has blossomed in this state because we've aligned the incentives. It's economically beneficial for residential customers, for commercial customers to get solar.
So I'm guessing that you two, this makes me think of the Green New Deal and the conversation that it sparked. Does that fit the transformative change descriptor that I mentioned a moment ago? Would that be
In general, yes. In general,
Yeah.
it says, yeah, we have to think about how we manage our economy, our energy system, our agricultural system in a different way that can be sustainable, help create equity in our society, and protect the environment.
Closing question. I think you'll get the last word here. I read in the executive summary that since 1970, the population of humans on the Earth has gone from 3.7 billion to 7.6 billion, which is, to me, a jaw-dropping number. Even if we engage in transformative change, isn't that a big problem going forward?
So a lot of the projections that the UN uses, for example, suggest that the global population will top out somewhere around 9 billion people. That's a lot of people. We can feed that many people. And if we do this alignment and transformative change, we can feed them, we can clothe them, we can provide a good life for people, and we can preserve the environment and preserve these services that we all depend on.
All right, we'll end with that glass half full take, which I appreciate. Anthony Janetos, David Cash, thank you both for being here.